Hey everyone! Strap in for another bone-chilling true horror case that'll keep you up at night. Hit subscribe to support the channel. It means everything. Let's dive right in. In psychology, there is a term called declarable syndrome, which refers to a morbid obsession one person has with another. The condition is often associated with the youngest daughter of the famous French writer Victor Hugo, Adele Hugo. She was a very attractive girl and a talented pianist, but unrequited love severely affected her mental state. As a result, she essentially poisoned her own life and the life of her lover, pursuing him for years and falsely claiming to be his wife, which ultimately had a destructive impact on her life. Unfortunately, Adele spent a significant portion of her life within the walls of a psychiatric hospital. It's worth noting that this condition, where one person becomes overly interested or even obsessed with another to the point of losing control over their emotions, is a fairly common phenomenon. In most cases, an experienced psychologist can help. Sometimes, hospitalization and more intensive therapy are required. But occasionally, such an obsession borders on insanity, pushing a person to desperate, unpredictable, and extremely cruel actions. The case of Emma Jangestig in 2008 shook all of Europe and became one of the most brutal in the history of Swedish forensic science. The perpetrator could have been found insane, and due to a lack of hard evidence, authorities even considered closing the case. But she showed her true face in the courtroom. Emma Jangestig was from an immature young family and a native of Stockholm, where she was born on February 16, 1985. She spent almost all of her childhood and adolescence there. She was raised in a simple family as the younger of two daughters, growing up with her older sister, Katarina. At the age of 19, Emma married a young man named Niklas Jangestig, whom she had begun dating while still in high school. He wasn't much older than her, and at the time of their marriage, Emma was already expecting a child. At 20, Emma became a mother for the first time, giving birth to a son named Max. A year and a half later, she had a second child, a daughter named Saga. But despite having two children together, the couple was still too young and unprepared for family life and the hardships of everyday responsibilities. They constantly quarreled over trivial matters, could not find common ground, and soon after their daughter's birth, decided to separate. But then came the difficult and painful question of child custody. Niklas wanted not only to help financially, but to take a direct part in their lives and upbringing. Emma wasn't against this, but she soon began a new romantic relationship. She moved to a small town called Arboga, located about 150 kilometers from Stockholm, to live with her new lover, and she took the children with her. Her ex-husband was against this because he wanted to be able to see his daughter and son every day. The ex-spouses met repeatedly in court to settle the matter, and Niklas even threatened Emma, which she immediately reported to the police. They couldn't resolve things amicably, and each parent began seeking sole custody. Now, about this new love. Emma met a guy named Torgny Hellberg online. They quickly hit it off, grew close, and a romantic relationship began. The fact that the 23-year-old girl already had two children from a previous marriage didn't bother the young man. He had long dreamed of a family and was ready to accept them as his own. The new couple first lived in a small house that Torgny had inherited, but when they decided to get married, they moved to a larger home where they could live comfortably and each child could have their own cozy room. Torgny had a good job with a decent salary at the time, and Emma focused on raising the small children and making a home. But as a designer by education, she planned to work in her specialty in the future. The couple planned to marry in 2008, but those plans were never meant to be. Now, to the brutal massacre. March 17, 2008 was an ordinary Monday. Torgny went to work early in the morning, and Emma stayed home with 3-year-old Max and 1-year-old Saga. That evening, Emma was preparing dinner, waiting for her fiancé to return, while simultaneously chatting online with her sister Katarina about a gift for their parents' upcoming wedding anniversary. At around 6:30 in the evening, Emma got a call from Torgny, warning her that he was running late at work. He said they could start dinner without him. After the brief call, Emma continued her household chores, fed the children, and then sat back down at the computer to continue texting her sister. At 7:07 p.m., their communication abruptly stopped, literally mid-word. Katerina thought it was very strange, because she could see her sister was typing a message, but for some reason never sent it. 5 minutes later, a worried Katerina called Emma, but she didn't pick up. Then she dialed Torgny's number to find out what was going on. The young man was on his way home from work, just approaching the house, so he assured Katerina that everything was fine. He said Emma was probably just distracted by the kids and would call back as soon as she could. When Torgny arrived at the house, he was surprised to find the front door unlocked. Going inside, he immediately noticed a mess, thinking the children had made it while playing. But then he saw brown stains and splatters on the floor and realized with horror that it was blood.
Torgny called out for Emma and the children several times, but no one answered.
In the hallway on the floor, he saw a strange object. At first, he thought it was a doll because the figure was lying in a completely unnatural pose. As he got closer, however, he realized it was Saga, lying in a pool of her own blood. Her head and face were disfigured beyond recognition, turned into a bloody mess. A little farther away lay her brother in a similarly horrifying state, with a fractured skull. Their mother was also on the floor, covered in blood and in an unnatural position. Her face was badly shattered and disfigured. It seemed none of them were showing any signs of life. Shocked, Torgny pulled out his cell phone with trembling hands and dialed emergency services to report what he'd found. At that moment, Emma shuddered and let out a loud, long groan. Police officers and paramedics arrived on the scene immediately. They found a weak pulse in all 3 victims and quickly began resuscitation efforts. The scene was horrifying. No one could understand what kind of monster could do this to a young woman and her children, but saving their lives was the priority, so all efforts were focused on getting the victims to the nearest hospital. Fighting for their lives and the beginning of the investigation. From the start, the paramedics expressed doubt that the victims could be brought to the hospital alive. However, all 3 were still alive upon arrival. All were diagnosed with open head injuries, severe brain damage, and extensive blood loss. The doctors gave no prognosis, only doing the best they could. Max and Saga were in critical condition. Even if their lives were saved, it was unlikely they would ever be able to breathe on their own again. Their mother's condition was assessed as very serious but stable. The young woman was put into a medically induced coma and placed on life support, hoping her body could recover. While doctors fought for the victims' lives, forensic experts worked the scene, trying to find clues and piece together the crime. Inside the house, chaos reigned. Belongings were scattered. There was blood on the floor and walls. Unfortunately, the medical personnel had left behind a lot of clutter and had moved items to access the victims. The floor where Emma, Max, and Saga had been lying was literally trampled. Investigators now had to figure out which footprints belonged to the first responders and if the perpetrator's prints were among them. Remarkably, the intruder had carried out the massacre in, at most, 13 minutes. Emma's last message to her sister was sent at 7:07 p.m., and by 7:20 p.m., a terrified Torgny had already called the police. The brutality of the attack suggested a personal motive and a deep hatred for the victims. The murder weapon was a blunt, heavy object, most likely a hammer, which the assailant used to bludgeon the victims with ferocity. However, no such weapon was found at the scene, leading to the obvious conclusion that the perpetrator had taken it with them. The first suspect. From the beginning, Torgny Hellberg was the prime suspect. He wasn't married to Emma and wasn't the father of her children, so it was suggested that a domestic quarrel might have escalated into a bloodbath. The grief-stricken man was questioned immediately, but he had an ironclad alibi. First, he really had been late at work, which was confirmed by his boss and colleagues. Second, at the time of the attack, he was walking down the street and was captured on several CCTV cameras. Even so, investigators took a detailed statement from Torgny, thinking he might have seen or heard something important. However, he couldn't remember anything specific. It was a normal evening until he discovered the horrific scene. The only thing that struck him as odd was the unlocked front door, which suggested Emma might have let the attacker in. After questioning, he was released. By then, he had already informed his fiancée's family. Emma's parents rushed from Stockholm to Arboga. Together, they drove straight to the hospital. But on the way, they heard terrible news on the car radio. Max and Saga had died from their injuries without ever regaining consciousness. The ex-husband's revenge? The new suspect was Emma's ex-husband and the father of the children, Nicholas. The couple had been divorced for over a year and had not parted on peaceful terms. They constantly argued, sued for custody, and Nicholas had even threatened his ex-wife, which she had reported to the police. It seemed everything fit. After the breakup, the young woman had taken the children to another city to live with her new partner. Their father, failing to get custody through the courts and holding a grudge against Emma, might have taken a desperate step and, in a fit of rage, killed his own heirs. Nicholas was immediately tracked down and taken into custody. The man seemed utterly crushed by the news of his children's deaths, sobbing and constantly asking if it was some kind of mistake. When he was charged with the crime, he was first stunned, then began shouting that he would never hurt his children, whom he adored. When asked for his alibi, Nicholas said he was in another city on a day trip for work. It sounded strange, but his alibi was soon confirmed. He was indeed 120 miles from the crime scene when someone attacked his ex-wife and children. He was released the next day. Searching for clues and fearing for the life of the sole survivor, forensic teams remained active at the scene, searching for any clue, evidence, or trace of the attacker. The perpetrator had obviously worn gloves and left no fingerprints. The shoe prints were much more difficult to analyze because a dozen medical personnel had been in the house to help and remove the victims. Now they had to collect all the footprints and figure out which ones didn't belong to the medics, Torgny, or the victims themselves. Authorities feared that the criminal, learning that Emma had survived, might try to sneak into the hospital to finish the job. After all, she was the crucial witness who could identify them if she regained consciousness. Therefore, a 24-hour guard was posted outside Emma Jangestig's room. Meanwhile, neighbors were interviewed for possible leads. One woman recalled that around 5 o'clock that evening, a stranger dressed in black clothes was loitering near Emma and Torgny's house. She thought it was strange but couldn't see the person's face because it was hidden by a hood. However, the neighbor suggested it could have been a woman because the figure was short and frail. This same figure in black clothes with a hood was also captured on a street surveillance camera near a store just a couple of minutes' walk from the crime scene. Law enforcement also thought the person in the video appeared to be a short, frail-looking woman. But who was she? And why would she want to harm Emma and her children? Investigators decided to show the recording to Torgny to get his opinion on who the stranger might be. From the first frames, the man's face changed. He turned pale and then said it could be his ex-girlfriend, 31-year-old Christine Schürer, though he couldn't be certain. So, who is Christine Schürer? Torgny's former girlfriend was born in Hanover, Germany on June 30th, 1976. When she was still a child, her father left the family and practically stopped communicating with his daughter, which negatively affected her mental state and behavior. She grew up willful and purposeful, but had a complex character. As a teenager, she went to the United States on an exchange program and lived in New York for several years. She received a good education in history and archaeology, traveled extensively throughout Europe, and took part in excavations and expeditions. In 2006, she went to Greece, to the island of Crete, where she got a job as a tour guide at a popular hotel. It was there, in July, that 26-year-old Torgny arrived on vacation. He immediately caught Christine's eye, and he also liked this smart, interesting, and educated girl. They had a brief romance. After he left, they continued to talk on the phone and correspond online. A few months later, Christine came to Sweden to visit him. Torgny wasn't ready for a serious relationship and tried to gently end it. So, when Christine suggested a weekend trip to the mountains, he refused and sincerely hoped that was the last time they would see each other. But the girl kept calling, writing, and insisting on another meeting. In January 2007, during a phone call, Torgny told Christine it was over and they shouldn't meet again. But Christine pretended not to hear. She continued to call, asking to visit and inviting Torgny on vacation with her. Later in 2007, Christine came back to Sweden and began literally stalking her ex-boyfriend. She tried to persuade him to restart their relationship, even though he honestly admitted he was already seeing someone else. Then, Christine said that during her previous visit, she had forgotten some things at his house and needed to pick them up. Torgny agreed, but as soon as they were inside, his ex-lover tried to seduce him. After receiving a firm refusal, she said he would regret it. 3 months later, Christine returned again. She began apologizing for her behavior and again tried to persuade him to get back together. He rejected her. That evening, she called him saying she had swallowed pills because she didn't want to live without him. Torgny called an ambulance and also called her family, telling them about Christine's actions and advising them to have her see a psychiatrist. After Schürer received care at the hospital, her mother took her home and placed her in a psychiatric hospital, where she stayed for over a month. However, the treatment didn't seem to help much, and the girl remained literally obsessed with her ex-lover, constantly thinking of ways to get him back and inventing new reasons to meet. In October 2007, Christine decided to move to Sweden. She settled in the suburbs of Stockholm, renting an apartment with another girl. She began pursuing her ex-boyfriend again. When she finally got to meet him, she told him she had given birth to a son by him, but had given the child up for adoption. Torgny was shocked by this news. What he wanted to know most was when this had happened. The last time they had been intimate was over a year prior, and they had met 3 more times since then. But Christine had never shown any signs of pregnancy. She answered evasively, each time adding new details. In January 2008, after a dozen unsuccessful attempts to meet with Torgny, Christine wrote him a message saying their son had been diagnosed with a hereditary disease and that they needed to go to Germany together to see him. She added that the child's adoptive father would contact him with the details. By this time, Torgny and Emma were moving into their new home, and Emma was aware of the whole story. She believed Torgny's ex-girlfriend was simply trying to lure him to Germany and that no son existed. When a man calling himself the adoptive father phoned Torgny, Torgny, on Emma's advice, began asking questions about when the boy was born, which hospital, and so on. The caller became clearly annoyed, avoided answering, and then finally hung up. So Torgny finally concluded that no son had ever existed. Christine had made up the whole story and gotten an acquaintance to play along. Christine's arrest and the search for evidence. After hearing this convoluted story, detectives quickly found where the new suspect lived and went to the address. Her roommate answered the door and told them Christine had packed her things in a hurry the day before and said she was returning to Germany. A check confirmed the girl had indeed left the country. The Swedish police now had to seek help from their German colleagues to arrest her. An arrest warrant was issued, and she was arrested on March 30th. When the suspect was arrested, she claimed it was a mistake and that she had nothing to do with the massacre. But after she was extradited to Sweden, she immediately asked to see Torgny, a request that was denied. She remained completely calm, but periodically asked to meet or call her ex again. Christine's rented apartment was thoroughly searched. Her phone and laptop were seized for inspection. All her clothes were checked, but no traces of blood were found. By then, investigators had identified which bloody shoe prints at the scene didn't belong to the medics or family members. They determined the prints were from a specific brand and style of athletic shoe. The size matched what the suspect wore. She claimed she never owned such sneakers, but her roommate quickly refuted that statement. Much more interesting finds were on Christine's laptop. It was full of photos of Torgny, pictures of them together, and pictures of him alone, or with his new lover. Also, in a separate folder with a very unpleasant title, were pictures of Emma and her children that the suspect had copied from her rival's social media page. Schürer had captioned each photo with insulting, threatening, and downright frightening comments. Her recovered search history contained queries on how to commit murder without leaving traces, how to hide evidence, and how to divert suspicion. In her notes, investigators also found a floor plan of Emma and Torgny's new home, along with notes on when Torgny left for work, what time he returned, and other details about the family's daily routine. An interview with the survivor. Emma's condition stabilized. Her vital signs gradually improved, and by the end of March, doctors began to slowly bring her out of the medically induced coma. When she woke up, she still couldn't speak because of a breathing tube, but her gaze was alert. It was clear she recognized the relatives in the room, but didn't understand what had happened to her, or how she ended up in the hospital. As soon as she was a little stronger and able to speak, police arranged to talk to her, deciding not to tell her about the children right away. It turned out Emma had no memory of the events of that day, and believed she must have been in a car accident. She kept asking about the children and if they were okay. At first, she was given evasive answers, but then her family and medical team decided she had to know. When Emma was told what had happened and that her babies were gone, she became hysterical. Doctors had to sedate her. When she woke up, she didn't remember the conversation and asked about the children again. This continued for several weeks. Each time she was told about the deaths of her daughter and son, and each time her brain seemed to reject the information, erasing it. After another month, Emma, accompanied by medical staff, was brought back to the crime scene. Once inside the house, she suddenly remembered everything. The young woman recounted how she was texting her sister, setting the table, with the children playing nearby, when there was a knock on the door. She opened it and saw a short female figure dressed in dark clothing on the threshold. When she asked what the woman wanted, she felt a sharp pain, and everything went black. The figure rushed into the house, and the desperate mother, with her last bit of strength, tried to chase after her to protect her children, but apparently collapsed in the hallway, where the attacker tried to finish her off. The trial and the verdict. Christine continued to stubbornly deny her guilt. The murder weapon was never found, and almost all the evidence was circumstantial, which gave her a high chance of getting away with it. However, Christine's roommate, when questioned, said a hammer had gone missing from her toolkit in March. She produced the kit, and the investigation determined the size and configuration of that brand of tool matched the wounds. But again, this was circumstantial. Detectives found surveillance footage from a suburban bus station showing Schürer had traveled to Arboga 3 times in the week before the crime. She couldn't explain why she had visited so often, but it was clear she had been staking out her future victims. The suspect also couldn't explain why she was searching for information on how to cover up a crime, or why she was collecting photos of Emma and her children. In August 2008, the trial of Christine Schürer began. She was accused of double murder with particular cruelty and attempted murder. The defendant behaved more than strangely. Upon entering the courtroom, she smiled and began waving to those present. When she was questioned about the massacre and shown gruesome crime scene photos of the mutilated bodies, she suddenly laughed. This suggested she might be insane, but a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation found her perfectly sane and fully aware of her actions. She seemed to be enjoying what she had done and didn't even try to hide it. When Emma was in the courtroom and saw Christine, she fainted. When she came to, she said she finally remembered everything, and that this was the face she saw last on that fateful day. Despite her defense lawyer's attempts to prove her innocence, the jury unanimously found her guilty on all counts on August 26, 2008. Christine was sentenced to life in prison on October 14, 2008. She was also ordered to pay compensation to Emma. No evidence was ever found that Christine had been pregnant or given birth to a son by Torgny. As for Emma Jangestig, her recovery was long and arduous, but Torgny did not abandon his beloved. They were married in 2010. The couple is now raising 2 children of their own, who know the sad story of their older brother and sister. Thanks for watching. Smash that like button, drop a comment, and share to help grow the channel. Your support means the world. Catch you next time.